the frozen marshes of medieval Russia, 100 exhausted warriors made 10,000 of history's most feared conquerors flee in terror. These weren't knights or princes. They were the last of a dying breed, and what they did in those blood-soaked woods changed how the Mongols saw fear itself. Picture this: 100 versus 10,000, a ratio that meant certain death. The fate of the last free lands of Rus hung in the balance. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the unstoppable Mongol war machine, which had crushed empires from China to Poland, suddenly learned to fear men who simply refused to die. You'll discover the tactical genius that turned a frozen swamp into a death trap. You'll learn why Mongol veterans called this their most terrifying battle. And you'll witness the moment when Batu Khan's elite warriors broke and ran. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. It's been nearly erased from history. How could terrain defeat the world's greatest horse archers? What made these particular warriors so different from the thousands who had fallen before them? And why do Mongol commanders still whisper the name of Bajorn the Unbreakable in their darkest nightmares? The morning sun revealed a sight that defied logic. Mongol bodies frozen solid in marsh ice, arranged in patterns that spoke of methodical slaughter. Elite warriors who had conquered half the known world lay scattered like broken dolls, their feared composite bows useless in the frozen mud. How could infantry defeat the mobile Mongol cavalry that had terrorized 3 continents? How could so few kill so many of history's most disciplined soldiers? The answers lie in a perfect storm of terrain, tactics, and an ancient warrior code that valued death over defeat. To understand how the impossible became inevitable, we need to see the world through both Mongol and Viking eyes. If you're fascinated by the forgotten battles that changed history, the ones they don't teach in schools, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war stories. Ring the bell so you never miss these untold tales of courage. Now, let me take you back to that frozen winter of 1240. The year 1240 saw the Mongol tsunami at its terrifying peak. Cities fell like dominoes across the Russian principalities. Ryazan had endured only 5 days before its mighty walls crumbled, its defenders slaughtered to the last man. Vladimir's burning towers lit the winter sky for weeks, a funeral pyre for an entire civilization. Kiev, the mother of Russian cities, waited in dread for its turn. Leading this apocalyptic force rode Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis himself, destroyer of nations, commander of 150,000 of the finest warriors ever assembled. His generals had perfected the art of systematic annihilation. They moved like a plague across the steppes, their horse archers darkening the sky with arrows, their Chinese siege engineers reducing fortresses to rubble. But here's what the Mongol scouts didn't report back about the lands near the Kama River. Hidden in the deep forests, a different breed of warrior waited. The Varangians, Norse blood flowing in Slavic lands, the emperor's own axes. These weren't local militia or frightened peasants. These were professionals who had stood guard in Constantinople, who had sailed the rivers from Sweden to the Black Sea, whose fathers had raided from England to the Caspian. The power dynamics couldn't have been more stark. The Rus principalities lay fragmented, princes more interested in fighting each other than the eastern threat. City after city had fallen because they couldn't unite, couldn't coordinate, couldn't imagine the scale of destruction heading their way. The Mongols exploited this perfectly. Unified command against divided resistance, discipline against chaos, strategic brilliance against tactical stupidity. Then the temperature dropped, and everything changed. The winter of 1240 brought the kind of cold that kills horses in their tracks, that turns breath to ice crystals before it leaves your mouth. The Mongols, masters of adaptation, had conquered in desert heat and mountain snow, but the Russian marshes in deep winter, that was something else entirely. The Varangian band that concerns us numbered exactly 100 men, not a huge army, not a prince's retinue, just a brotherhood bound by oaths older than Christ, by traditions that reached back to the Viking age. They had been moving south when word came of Mongol advances. Most sensible men would have fled west. The Varangians turned east. You need to understand what 10,000 horse archers means in medieval terms. It's not just superior numbers. It's overwhelming firepower, unmatched mobility, centuries of tactical evolution distilled into a perfect killing machine. The Mongols could loose 12 arrows per minute, per man. That's 120,000 arrows per minute. A literal storm of death that had broken every army from Beijing to Krakow. But in the marshes near the Kama River, geography itself would become a weapon. The frozen bogs created a maze of solid ground and hidden sinkholes. The dense forest, negated cavalry mobility. The narrow paths between ancient trees funneled armies into killing zones. What the Mongols found there would shatter their confidence in everything they thought they knew about war. The Mongol force that approached the Kama marshes represented the cream of Batu Khan's army. 10,000 riders, including 3 tumens of veteran horse archers, each man equipped with 2 composite bows and 150 arrows. Their Chinese siege engineers brought the latest military technology, catapults that could level walls, fire-lance flame weapons, and explosive powder charges that could shatter gates. Leading the vanguard rode the elite Chagatai units, the Khan's own fist, as they called themselves. These weren't mere soldiers but warrior aristocrats, each worth 10 normal fighters, trained from childhood in the arts of mounted warfare. Their armor combined Mongol leather with captured Persian mail, their horses the finest from the steppes, bred for endurance and trained to fight with hooves and teeth. But horses bred for steppes feared something else entirely in those marshes. The ground itself seemed hostile, firm one moment, sucking bog the next. The trees pressed close, blocking the sky, muffling sound. Mongol horses, used to endless horizons, grew nervous in the green darkness. Their riders, masters of psychological warfare, found themselves unsettled by the oppressive forest silence. Against this mechanical perfection of war stood the Varangian band, 100 veterans whose equipment spoke of decades of hard service. Chainmail worn over thick furs, the iron rings patched and repatched from countless battles. Danish axes, 7 pounds of perfectly balanced steel, edges honed to split mail like cloth, round shields of lindenwood, 3 feet across, reinforced with iron bands and painted with symbols that predated any Christian cross. At their head stood Bejorn the Unbreakable, though that wasn't the name his mother gave him. 43 winters had carved their story on his face. A Byzantine blade had taken his left eye, Pecheneg arrows had scarred his arms, and somewhere in the Greek islands, fire had melted part of his beard away forever. He'd served 3 emperors, survived 4 coup attempts, and learned the hard truth that in war, terrain matters more than numbers. Picture the Kama River Valley in deep winter. The river itself, usually 30 meters wide, had frozen solid enough to support heavy cavalry, or so it appeared. But the Varangians knew every deceptive current, every spot where springs kept the ice thin, every false crossing that looked safe but would swallow horse and rider whole. The marshes stretched for 3 square miles, a labyrinth of frozen pools, treacherous bogs, and paths that led nowhere. The forest pressed close on both sides, ancient pines and birches, their branches interlocked overhead, creating a twilight world even at noon. Snow lay thick between the trees, but the paths themselves were ice-polished by wind, treacherous for horses bred to grassland. Visibility dropped to 50 meters at best, sometimes less. In those conditions, the Mongol advantages of mobility and massed archery meant nothing. Then the scouts stopped returning. The first one, sent at dawn to survey the main path, simply vanished. No body, no horse, no sign of struggle. The second patrol, 5 men, rode out at noon. 1 horse returned at dusk, riderless, its saddle caked with frozen blood. The third reconnaissance in force, 20 veterans, found only strange marks in the snow, patterns that looked almost like runes, and the feeling of being watched from every shadow. What happened next defied every rule of medieval warfare. Instead of avoiding battle against overwhelming odds, instead of using the forest to escape, the Varangians prepared an invitation to death. They spent 3 days turning the marshes into a weapon, working with the focused intensity of men who knew they would never leave these woods alive. Trees were partially cut, ready to fall. Ice was carefully weakened at key crossings. Paths were blocked with hidden stakes. The forest itself was recruited into their army. As dawn broke on that frozen morning, death rode from 2 directions. From the east came the might of the Mongol Empire, 10,000 warriors who had never known defeat, whose very name made cities surrender without siege. From the west came 100 men who had already accepted their deaths, who saw this moment not as their ending but their immortality. The collision would create a legend that still echoes in the darkest Mongol nightmares. Day 1 dawned grey and bitter, 15 degrees below freezing, the kind of cold that makes metal burn bare skin. The Mongol vanguard, 500 picked riders, entered the marsh paths just after first light. They moved in standard formation, scouts ahead, main body following, flankers pushing through the trees. Professional, careful, alert. It wasn't enough. The first ambush came at the narrow crossing of a frozen stream. 20 Varangians rose from the snow like ghosts, axes already in motion. The lead Mongol riders, channeled onto the ice by fallen trees, had nowhere to flee. Danish